The sound of champagne flutes clinking together echoed through the grand hall of the Hamilton estate, where glittering chandeliers bathed the room in warm, golden light. It was a gathering of the elite wealthy business moguls, influencers, and celebrities, each trying to outdo the other with their status symbols and stories of success. At the center of the crowd stood Ryan Caldwell, a billionaire whose reputation for eccentricity was as well known as his fortune. "Here's to making the impossible possible," Ryan toasted with a confident grin, raising his glass as laughter bubbled up around him. His friends, a close-knit group of equally wealthy entrepreneurs, responded in kind, clinking their glasses with enthusiasm. Ryan thrived on these moments, where his words carried weight and his ideas, no matter how absurd, were taken seriously. Ryan's life was defined by challenges. He'd built his empire from scratch, turning risky gambles into fortune. But as he reached new heights of wealth, there was a restlessness inside him that money couldn't quiet. He sought excitement in unpredictable ways, and tonight, he had something new in mind. "All right, enough talk," Ryan said, lowering his glass with a sly smile. "I've got a bet for you guys." His friends leaned in, intrigued. They were used to Ryan's outlandish proposals. He had a knack for turning the mundane into a spectacle, whether it was acquiring entire companies on a whim or making billion-dollar deals over a poker game. But this time, the glint in his eye suggested something even more audacious. "I bet," he began, his voice low to build anticipation, "I can marry an ordinary woman, someone completely out of our world, and not only make the marriage work, but turn her into a key asset for my business." The group erupted into laughter. Ryan, who was notorious for his fleeting relationships, suggesting he could settle down? It was a joke. Ryan Caldwell was many things: brilliant, charming, a risk-taker, but committed in love? Never. "You've got to be kidding me," one of his friends said between chuckles. "You? Married? To someone who's not a model or a socialite?" Ryan's smirk widened. "Exactly. Someone who has no idea about this world of wealth, someone who's never even thought about the kind of life we live." "And you think you can turn her into one of us?" another friend chimed in, still laughing. "Not just one of us," Ryan corrected, "but someone who'll elevate my empire. She'll be more than just my wife, she'll be my greatest business partner." His friends exchanged glances, amusement flickering across their faces. They knew Ryan wasn't one to back down from a challenge, but this? It seemed far-fetched, even for him. "So who's the lucky woman?" one friend asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Ryan scanned the room with a calculating gaze. Amid the sea of designer gowns and tailored suits, a woman caught his eye. She was standing near the back, quietly serving trays of appetizers with a calm, professional demeanor. Dressed in a simple black chef's uniform, she moved through the crowd with the kind of grace that suggested years of experience. Her dark hair was tied back, and there was nothing particularly striking about her appearance compared to the glamorous guests around her, but there was something about her presence that intrigued him. "That one," Ryan said, nodding toward her. His friends turned to see who he was pointing at. "The chef," one of them blurted out in disbelief. "You've got to be joking." But Ryan wasn't joking. He didn't need the approval of his friends. There was something about the woman, her quiet confidence, the way she seemed entirely unfazed by the wealth and extravagance around her, that drew him in. She was different, exactly the kind of challenge he was looking for. Her name was Emma Davis, a private chef hired for the evening by the estate's event planner. She wasn't part of their world, nor did she want to be. She loved food, loved the art of creating something beautiful from raw ingredients, but the opulence of the event made her feel out of place. She preferred the quiet of her kitchen, where she could focus on the task at hand without the distraction of wealth and status. As Emma delivered another tray of canapés, she felt eyes on her. When she looked up, her gaze locked with Ryan's. For a moment, she hesitated, unsure why the most powerful man in the room was looking at her like that, like she was a puzzle he intended to solve. But then she quickly looked away, reminding herself that people like Ryan Caldwell didn't pay attention to people like her. She was invisible in their world. But to Ryan, she was anything but invisible. Emma Davis was perfect for his plan. She was humble, unpretentious, and completely outside the bubble of his privileged life. The idea of molding her into something more thrilled him in a way that his other conquests never had. This wasn't about business alone anymore. This was about control, transformation, and proving it to himself, if no one else, that he could shape any aspect of his life exactly the way he wanted. As the night wore on, Ryan's friends continued to joke about his ridiculous bet. But he wasn't listening. His mind was already spinning, considering the steps he'd take to bring Emma into his life, to make her his. It would be easy enough to charm her. Women always found him irresistible once he turned on the charm. But this wasn't just about seduction. No, this was about reshaping her entire existence. Ryan raised his glass one last time, a satisfied smirk on his face as he glanced back toward Emma. The game had already begun, and Emma Davis had no idea she was playing. The next morning, Emma Davis walked into the kitchen of the Hamilton estate for the last time, her head full of to-do lists and plans for her next gig. She'd catered countless events like this before, and each time, she was more than happy to leave the glitzy world of the ultra-wealthy behind. The kitchen was her domain, a world where she had control, where the only thing that mattered was the food on the plate. As she packed up her knives and utensils, the estate's event planner approached her, smiling. "Emma, great job last night." "The guests loved the food," the woman said, her voice warm and professional. Emma smiled politely, appreciating the compliment but eager to leave. "Thank you. I'm just about done here." Before the planner could respond, a tall figure stepped into the kitchen, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. Ryan Caldwell. He shouldn't have stood out dressed casually in a designer suit that was tailored to perfection, but his presence was unmistakable. The entire kitchen staff went still, unsure of why one of the wealthiest men in the country had just walked into their space. Emma felt a strange knot in her stomach as Ryan's eyes landed on her. "Emma Davis, right?" he asked, his voice casual but with an edge of interest. She wiped her hands on a towel, unsure why he was addressing her directly. "Yes. Can I help you with something, Mr. Caldwell?" "I hope you don't mind, but I was hoping to talk to you about a business opportunity." "A business opportunity?" Emma was confused. She wasn't in the market for business deals. She was a chef, and catering events like the one last night was her bread and butter. Still, the way he spoke, so confidently and with such ease, made it hard to say no. "I'm not sure what you mean," she said, trying to stay polite while mentally mapping out how quickly she could leave. Ryan stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "Your cooking last night, it was exceptional. I want to offer you a job. Full-time. You'd be my personal chef. But I'm not just looking for someone to make dinner. I want someone who can take my restaurants to the next level. You've got talent, and I don't offer this to just anyone." Emma blinked, completely caught off guard. This wasn't what she'd expected at all. Personal chef? Working for Ryan Caldwell sounded like walking into a lion's den. She'd heard stories about his lifestyle, about the way he used people for his own amusement. She wasn't interested in being another pawn in some billionaire's game. "I appreciate the offer, but I have a lot of other projects lined up. I'm not really looking for a full-time position right now," Emma replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Ryan's smile didn't falter, but there was a sharpness in his gaze now. He wasn't used to people saying no to him. "Think it over. I'll double whatever you're making right now. You won't have to worry about chasing after new gigs every week." Emma held her ground, despite the unease creeping up her spine. "Thank you, but I'm happy with my work. I like the freedom I have." Ryan's expression shifted, but he didn't push further. "Fair enough. But don't be too quick to dismiss the idea. You might find working for me has its advantages." With that, he turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving a strange tension hanging in the air. The other staff immediately began whispering, buzzing about the fact that Ryan Caldwell had just tried to hire Emma. but she wasn't flattered. Something about the whole exchange felt off. That evening, as Emma walked through the quiet streets of her neighborhood, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Why had Ryan Caldwell singled her out? She'd heard about men like him before, powerful, charming, but dangerous in their own way. They got what they wanted, no matter the cost. And she had no interest in becoming another of his projects. As the days passed, Emma went back to her normal routine, bouncing between catering gigs and working on new menu ideas for her pop-up restaurant. She pushed the strange encounter with Ryan to the back of her mind, convinced that she'd never see him again. But she was wrong. 2 weeks later, Emma was in the middle of a busy lunch service at a small bistro downtown when she spotted him again. Ryan. He was sitting at a table in the corner, watching her with that same calculating look. His presence sent a jolt through her. He wasn't just passing through, he was waiting for her. After the rush died down, she approached his table, keeping her expression neutral. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice clipped. "What brings you here?" "I was curious to see where else you work your magic," he replied, his tone casual. "I had a feeling this place would have your touch." Emma frowned. He wasn't being subtle, and the more he talked, the more uncomfortable she felt. "Is there something you need?" "Just wanted to check in. See if you've reconsidered my offer." Her patience was wearing thin. "I already told you, I'm not interested." Ryan leaned back in his chair, unbothered by her coldness. "I get that. But I'm a persistent man, Emma. And I don't like giving up when I see potential." She crossed her arms, standing her ground. "Look, Mr. Caldwell, I'm not sure what you think this is, but I'm not looking for some fairy tale job in your world. I like my life the way it is." Ryan's smile grew, almost like her defiance entertained him. "Fair enough. I respect that. But don't close the door just yet. Things have a way of changing." Before Emma could respond, he stood, leaving a hefty tip on the table before walking out. She stared after him, a mix of frustration and confusion boiling inside her. Who did he think he was, showing up like this, as if he could just wear her down? Weeks passed, and Emma tried to forget about Ryan Caldwell. She focused on her work, pouring her energy into perfecting her recipes and taking on more ambitious projects. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. It started with small things: a familiar car parked across the street from her apartment, glimpses of men in suits lingering outside her building. She told herself it was paranoia, that she was just overreacting, but the tension continued to build. One night, after a particularly long shift, she was walking home when she heard footsteps behind her. They were faint at first, but as she turned down a quieter street, they grew louder. Her heart pounded in her chest as she quickened her pace, but the footsteps matched her speed. She spun around, ready to confront whoever was following her, only to come face to face with one of Ryan's security guards. The man was tall, muscular, and completely out of place in her quiet neighborhood. "Miss Davis," the guard said, his tone professional but firm. "Mr. Caldwell asked me to make sure you get home safely." Emma's blood boiled. She wasn't some damsel in distress who needed protection, least of all from a man like Ryan Caldwell. "Tell Mr. Caldwell I don't need his help," she snapped, turning on her heel and walking away. But the guard didn't move. "I'm just doing my job, ma'am." Emma ignored him, but her anger simmered all the way home. This had gone too far. She wasn't some pawn he could push around. The next time Ryan showed up, she'd make it clear once and for all that she wasn't interested. The confrontation came sooner than she expected. 2 days later, Ryan appeared at one of her catering events, this time with a different tactic. He wasn't just there to charm her, he was there to impress. He arrived with a small entourage, and before Emma knew it, the entire event had turned into a networking opportunity for his business empire. High-profile guests mingled, and the whispers around the room quickly centered on Ryan's presence. But what caught Emma off guard wasn't the fact that he was there, it was the way he subtly involved her in the conversation. As if she was already part of his world. "Emma, why don't you come over here for a moment?" Ryan said smoothly, beckoning her over as he spoke to a group of investors. "I was just telling them about your work. You're quite the rising star in the culinary world." Emma clenched her jaw, forcing a tight smile as she joined the circle. She felt out of place, like she was being used as a prop in Ryan's game. His words were complimentary, but the way he maneuvered the conversation felt like manipulation. He was showcasing her, not as a person, but as a trophy. As the evening dragged on, Emma realized the full extent of Ryan's plan. He wasn't just offering her a job, he was pulling her into his orbit, making her part of his world whether she liked it or not. And the worst part? The people around her seemed to be falling for it. They saw her as an extension of Ryan's brand, another notch in his belt of success. By the end of the night, Emma had had enough. She found Ryan in a quiet corner, his attention focused on a glass of whiskey. "We need to talk," she said, her voice low and firm. Ryan looked up, raising an eyebrow. "About what?" "About this. All of this," she gestured around the room. "I don't want to be part of your world, Ryan. I don't care how much money you offer me or how persistent you are. I'm not interested." He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You're different, Emma. That's what I like about you." Emma shook her head, her frustration mounting. "This isn't a game to me." Ryan's smile faded slightly, but the confidence in his voice remained. "It might not be a game to you, but it is to me. And I don't lose." If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe. Emma sat on the edge of her bed, her mind racing with thoughts of Ryan Caldwell and the strange hold he seemed to have over her life. Despite her best efforts to push him away, he was everywhere, at her events, in her thoughts, and even on the lips of her colleagues, who seemed enchanted by the idea of her connection to the billionaire. She had tried everything to sever the ties, but Ryan was relentless, pushing and pulling her closer to his orbit no matter how much she resisted. It had reached a point where Emma could no longer focus on her work. Every phone call, every new client she met with, every opportunity that came her way, it all seemed to have his fingerprints on it. What had started as a harmless offer for a job had turned into something far more insidious. Ryan wasn't just interested in her skills as a chef, he wanted control. Control of her time, her choices, her very future. And the worst part? Emma was beginning to feel trapped. No matter how many times she said no, no matter how hard she tried to distance herself, Ryan seemed determined to keep her under his influence. She had never felt so powerless. That night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Emma resolved to take action. She couldn't live like this, constantly looking over her shoulder, feeling like her life was no longer her own. She needed to confront Ryan, to end whatever strange game he was playing once and for all. She was done with his manipulations. The next day, she called him. Ryan Caldwell's office was as sleek and polished as the man himself. Glass walls, minimalist furniture, and an enormous view of the city skyline, it was a reflection of his empire, cold and imposing, but undeniably impressive. Emma had never been here before, and the sterile perfection of it all made her uneasy. This was his domain, and she felt like an intruder. When Ryan stepped out from behind his desk, his face lit up in a way that set her on edge. "Emma," he greeted her, his smile disarming. "I wasn't expecting a visit. But I'm glad you're here." She cut to the chase. "We need to talk, Ryan. About this situation." Ryan's brow furrowed slightly, though his smile didn't waver. "Situation?" "This," Emma gestured between them. "The way you've been showing up at my events, the offers, the security guards following me. It needs to stop." Ryan leaned against his desk, folding his arms. "I'm just looking out for you," Emma. You might not realize it yet, but I'm helping you. I'm offering you opportunities you could never get on your own. That's not the point, she said sharply. I didn't ask for your help. I don't need it. Ryan's smile faltered, and for a brief moment, something darker flickered behind his eyes. You don't see it, do you? What I'm offering you is a future you could never have imagined. I'm giving you a way into a world that's out of reach for most people. And I'm doing it because I believe in you. Emma shook her head, her frustration boiling over. This isn't about believing in me, Ryan. This is about control. You don't want a partner, you want someone you can mold, someone you can manipulate. Ryan's expression hardened. That's not true. It is true, Emma pressed. And I won't let you do it. I won't let you take over my life. For a moment, the tension in the room was palpable, neither of them willing to back down. But then Ryan's smile returned, though this time it was colder, more calculating. You're wrong, Emma. I'm offering you something no one else ever will. You're going to see that soon enough. Emma took a step back, suddenly feeling like she was in over her head. She had expected him to fight back, to try to convince her, but the steely look in his eyes unnerved her. It was like he wasn't even listening to her, like her words were irrelevant because he had already decided how things would play out. I'm done, Ryan, she said, her voice firm. I'm not going to let you control me anymore. Ryan didn't respond, and that silence hung between them like a threat. Emma turned and left his office, her heart pounding as she made her way out of the building. She had said what she needed to say. Now, it was time to see if Ryan would finally leave her alone. But Ryan Caldwell had never been the type to let go easily. A week passed, and for the first time in months, Emma felt a sense of relief. Ryan had stopped contacting her, and there were no more unexpected appearances at her events. She could finally breathe again, focus on her work without the looming presence of the billionaire casting a shadow over everything she did. It was a freedom she hadn't realized she'd missed so much. Then the email came. Emma opened her inbox to find a message with no subject line. It was from an unknown address, but as soon as she clicked on it, her heart sank. The email contained a series of attachments, legal documents. At first, she couldn't make sense of them. They were contracts, transfer agreements, and property deeds, all with her name on them. Confused, she scrolled through the pages, her mind racing. What was this? And then she saw it. At the bottom of one of the pages was Ryan's signature. Emma's stomach turned as she realized what had happened. Ryan had bought her restaurant. The small pop-up space she'd been using for her personal projects, the one thing in her life that had been entirely hers, he owned it now. Panic set in. She hadn't signed any papers, hadn't agreed to any of this. How could he have done this without her knowledge? How had she not seen this coming? Desperately, she called her lawyer, her voice shaking as she explained the situation. He promised to look into it, but Emma could hear the uncertainty in his voice. If Ryan had gone through the proper legal channels, and it seemed like he had, there might not be much she could do to reverse it. Emma hung up the phone, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under her. Ryan hadn't just bought her restaurant, he had taken the last piece of her life that was truly hers. And he had done it without a second thought. That evening, she showed up at Ryan's penthouse, fury burning in her chest. She had never been this angry in her life. She didn't care about the consequences anymore. She just wanted to confront him, to make him see what he had done. The doorman let her up without question, and when she arrived at Ryan's door, she pounded on it until he answered. Ryan opened the door, his expression unreadable. Emma. You bought my restaurant, she spat, pushing past him and storming into the penthouse. What the hell is wrong with you? You had no right. Ryan closed the door calmly, watching her with an unnerving coolness. I was helping you. That restaurant was barely staying afloat. Now, it has real potential. You didn't help me. You stole from me. Emma shouted, her voice breaking with the weight of her anger. You've been trying to control me from the start, and now you've taken the one thing I had left that was mine. Ryan stepped closer, his eyes darkening. You still don't understand, do you? This isn't about control, Emma. This is about survival. You think you can make it on your own in this world? You're wrong. I'm the only one who can give you what you need. Emma felt like she was going to explode. What I need is for you to leave me alone. Ryan's face softened slightly, but there was a dangerous edge to his voice. I can't do that, Emma. I won't. There was a moment of silence, a heavy tension hanging in the air as they stared each other down. Emma's chest heaved with the weight of her anger, but deep down, she realized something terrifying. Ryan wasn't going to stop. He wasn't going to let her go. And that's when the truth hit her, like a gut punch she hadn't seen coming. I'm not just a project to you, am I? She said quietly, her voice trembling. Ryan didn't answer, but the look in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't just about business, or control, or even the bet he had made with his friends. This was personal. Why me? She asked, her voice cracking. Ryan's expression was unreadable, but for the first time, there was something vulnerable in his eyes. Because you're different, Emma. You make me feel like, he stopped himself, his jaw tightening as if the words were too difficult to say. Emma shook her head, backing away from him. No. This isn't real. This is just another game to you. But deep down, she knew it wasn't a game anymore. Ryan had crossed a line, and now, they were both in too deep. If you liked the story, don't forget to subscribe. Emma stood at the window of her small apartment, staring out at the darkened street below. The city was quiet tonight, its usual buzz replaced by an eerie stillness that mirrored the turmoil inside her. Despite everything, despite her confrontation with Ryan and the harsh words exchanged, his presence still lingered in her life. He wasn't physically there anymore, but she felt him in the quiet moments, when her thoughts drifted against her will. She hated how much space he took up in her mind. Emma wanted to believe that Ryan's obsession had been purely about control. It was easier to think of him as a manipulative billionaire who saw her as a pawn in his games. And for weeks, she clung to that belief because it made it easier to stay angry. But she knew better now. The vulnerability she had seen in his eyes during that last meeting haunted her. It scared her because, deep down, a part of her understood him. She recognized the loneliness hidden beneath his powerful exterior, the same loneliness that had driven him to hold on to her so tightly. It wasn't just a game to Ryan. And that realization made everything more complicated. But Emma wasn't about to let him take over her life again. She had worked too hard to get where she was, building her career from scratch, pouring her passion into the small restaurant that had become her sanctuary. Ryan had tried to steal that from her, and though he had returned it without much of a fight, she couldn't forget the damage he had caused. She turned away from the window, her mind made up. She needed to move forward, to leave Ryan behind for good. But doing so would require more than just ignoring the memories. It would require letting go of the emotional hold he had over her. The next morning, Emma met with her lawyer, Tom Weston, once again to finalize the transfer of ownership for her restaurant. As they reviewed the paperwork, Emma could feel a sense of closure settling over her, like the final page of a long, painful chapter was being written. She had her restaurant back, and more importantly, she had her freedom. Tom, who had been with her through the entire ordeal, offered a small smile as they finished. "You did it," he said. "It's officially yours again." Emma nodded, but the relief she had expected didn't wash over her. Instead, she felt a strange hollowness, like the victory wasn't as sweet as she had imagined. "Thanks, Tom. I couldn't have done this without you." He closed the folder of documents and leaned back in his chair, studying her for a moment. "You know, Emma, I've been doing this a long time. I've seen a lot of cases where people are fighting over power, control, money. But this one, it's different. I don't think Ryan was ever just after your business." Emma frowned. "What do you mean?" Tom shrugged. "I'm just saying, from everything I've seen, it seems like this was personal for him. Most clients don't just give up when they're in his position. Ryan Caldwell doesn't strike me as the type to fold unless there's something bigger at play." His words left Emma unsettled, though she didn't want to admit that Tom might be right. The ease with which Ryan had let her go, handing over the restaurant, walking away without further conflict, hadn't made sense to her at the time. But now, she wondered if there was more to his motivations than she had initially thought. "I don't know what he wants," Emma said quietly, more to herself than to Tom. Tom gave her a sympathetic look. "Maybe it's time you find out." Emma spent the next few weeks trying to bury herself in work. She threw herself into her restaurant with renewed energy, determined to make it a success on her own terms. She hired new staff, revamped the menu, and started planning events to draw in more customers. On the surface, everything seemed to be going well. But beneath it all, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Her conversations with Tom echoed in her mind, and no matter how much she tried to distract herself, thoughts of Ryan kept creeping back in. What had he really wanted from her? Was it control? Power? Or had there been something else? Something deeper? Late one night, after a particularly long shift, Emma found herself sitting alone in the dimly lit dining area of the restaurant, staring at a glass of wine that she hadn't touched. The restaurant was quiet now, the tables cleared, the lights low. It was the kind of peaceful moment that she had always cherished after a busy night of service. But tonight, the peace felt hollow. She couldn't deny it anymore. She missed Ryan. The thought hit her like a punch to the gut, stealing the breath from her lungs. She had spent so much time pushing him away, convincing herself that he was toxic, that he was dangerous. And maybe he was. But despite all of that, there had been something between them, something real. The way he had looked at her, the vulnerability in his voice when he had confessed how much he cared, it had left an imprint on her heart, whether she wanted to admit it or not. Emma sat there in the quiet, the weight of her emotions pressing down on her. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know how to reconcile the anger she still felt with the strange pull she had toward him. And worst of all, she didn't know if confronting him again would only lead to more pain. But one thing was clear, she couldn't keep running from the truth. The next day, Emma woke with a sense of determination. She couldn't ignore her feelings any longer. If she wanted to move on, to find peace, she needed answers. She needed to understand what Ryan had truly wanted from her and why she couldn't let him go. It was a Saturday morning, and the city was just beginning to wake up as Emma made her way to Ryan's office building. She didn't know if he would be there, but it was the only place she could think to start. The thought of seeing him again filled her with both anticipation and dread, but she pushed those emotions aside. This wasn't about rekindling anything. This was about closure. When she arrived at the sleek glass tower where Ryan's corporate headquarters were located, Emma felt a pang of anxiety. She hadn't been here since that fateful meeting with him months ago, and stepping into his world again felt like stepping into a place she no longer belonged. The lobby was quiet, with only a few people milling about. Emma approached the receptionist, feeling out of place in her casual jeans and sweater compared to the polished professionals around her. "I'm here to see Ryan Caldwell," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves churning in her stomach. The receptionist, a young woman with a bright smile, glanced at her computer screen. "Do you have an appointment?" Emma shook her head. "No, but..." Before she could explain, the receptionist's phone rang, and she answered it quickly. After a moment, she nodded and looked back at Emma. "Mr. Caldwell is expecting you. You can go up." Emma blinked in surprise. Expecting her? How could he have known she was coming? Feeling a mix of confusion and curiosity, Emma stepped into the elevator and rode it up to the top floor. When the doors opened, she was greeted by the familiar sight of Ryan's pristine office glass walls, minimalist furniture, and that breathtaking view of the city skyline. And there, standing by the window, was Ryan. He turned as she entered, his expression unreadable. "Emma," he said, his voice low and calm. "I thought you might come." She didn't respond right away, still trying to process the fact that he had known she would be here. "How?" "I've been waiting," he said simply, as if that explained everything. Emma frowned, crossing her arms as she stood in the middle of the room. "Waiting for what?" Ryan walked over to her, his movements slow and deliberate, as though he didn't want to startle her. "For you to realize that we're not finished." Her heart skipped a beat at his words, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Ryan, I came here for answers. Not for whatever this is." He stopped a few feet away from her, his gaze intense. "Then ask your questions." Emma took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Why did you really buy my restaurant? Why did you push me so hard? Was it just about control, or was there more to it?" Ryan's expression softened, and for a moment, Emma thought she saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. "It was never just about control," he said quietly. "I didn't realize it at first, but the more time I spent with you, the more I understood. It wasn't just business, Emma. I needed you." The vulnerability in his voice caught her off guard, and for a brief moment, she felt her walls start to crumble. But she couldn't let herself fall back into his orbit so easily. "Not without understanding everything." "Why?" she pressed. "Why me? You could have anyone, Ryan. Why did you choose me?" Ryan looked away, his jaw tightening as if the answer pained him. "Because you're the first person who's ever made me feel like I wasn't in control. And that scared me." Emma stared at him, her mind reeling. She had never expected him to admit something like that, especially not so openly. Ryan Caldwell was a man who thrived on power, who prided himself on being in control of every aspect of his life. For him to admit that he had lost control, even for a moment, was monumental. "I didn't want to hurt you," Ryan continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I didn't know how else to handle it. I've spent my entire life building walls, keeping people at a distance. You were the first person who got through those walls, and I didn't know how to deal with that. So I tried to control the situation the only way I knew how." Emma felt her heart ache at his words. She had seen glimpses of the man behind the mask before, but hearing him admit his fears so plainly made her realize just how much he had been struggling. But that didn't change the fact that he had hurt her. "You can't just take people's lives over, Ryan," she said softly. "You can't buy your way into their hearts." Ryan flinched at her words, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked vulnerable, truly vulnerable. "I know," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know I screwed up. And I don't expect you to forgive me. But I need you to understand that I never meant to lose you." Emma didn't know how to respond. The pain in his voice was so real, so raw, that it cut through her anger and left her feeling exposed. She had come here for closure, for answers, and now that she had them, she didn't know what to do with the emotions swirling inside her. She had always thought that walking away from Ryan would be the best thing for her, that leaving him behind would allow her to heal. But now, standing here with him, she wasn't so sure. Emma stood there, her mind a whirlwind of emotions as she faced Ryan. She had spent so much time thinking that he was just another powerful man who used his influence to manipulate people. And, in many ways, that had been true. But now, hearing the raw vulnerability in his voice, seeing the pain etched across his face, she realized that Ryan wasn't just trying to control her, he had been trying to hold on to something deeper, something that terrified him as much as it confused her. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Ryan," Emma said softly, her voice breaking slightly as she spoke. "You took so much from me, tried to force me into a life I didn't want." Ryan's shoulders sagged slightly, as though the weight of her words crushed him. "I know," he murmured, his eyes dropping to the floor. "I was wrong. I thought I could, make you see things my way, but I went about it all wrong." Emma hesitated, unsure of what to say. Part of her wanted to yell, to release the months of frustration, confusion, and anger that had been building up inside her. But another part, the part that had seen the man behind the mask, felt something else entirely. Was it pity? Or was it something more? "You can't control everything, Ryan," she said, a little firmer now. "You can't just buy people's loyalty or their love. You can't take away their choices." Ryan nodded slowly, still not meeting her eyes. "I know that now. But it's all I've ever known. It's the only way I've ever learned to protect myself." His confession hung in the air between them, and suddenly, Emma realized something she hadn't seen before. Ryan had been just as trapped by his own need for control as she had been by his attempts to control her. The way he wielded his power wasn't just a tool for manipulation, it was a shield. A way to keep people from getting too close, from seeing his own vulnerabilities. And somehow, she had managed to break through that shield. "I spent my whole life building this empire," Ryan continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "And in doing that, I forgot what it meant to be human. I thought power and success were all I needed to protect myself from getting hurt." Emma's heart twisted at his words. She had heard similar stories before, powerful men who lost themselves in the pursuit of success, who forgot how to be vulnerable, who built walls so high that no one could get close. But with Ryan, it felt different. His obsession with control had almost destroyed them both. "So what now?" Emma asked quietly, searching his face for any sign of the man she had once feared, the man who had tried to take over her life. But all she saw now was someone lost, someone who didn't know how to move forward. Ryan finally looked up, his blue eyes locking onto hers. "That's up to you, Emma. I'll let you go if that's what you want. I'll walk away and never bother you again." The sincerity in his voice was undeniable, and for the first time since this whole ordeal had begun, Emma felt like she had the power. She could end this. She could walk away and leave Ryan behind for good, reclaim her life and her freedom. But as she stared into his eyes, she realized that leaving wasn't as simple as it seemed. She had come here looking for closure, for a way to put this chapter of her life behind her. But the more she listened to Ryan, the more she realized that walking away might not be what she truly wanted. There was something between them, something complicated, messy, and filled with both hurt and potential. And Emma wasn't sure if she could turn her back on it without at least trying to understand it fully. She took a deep breath, steadying herself before speaking. "I don't know what I want right now. But I don't think walking away is the answer either." Ryan's eyes flickered with a brief flash of hope, though he didn't move. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Emma hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I'm saying that maybe we need to figure this out. I don't know if we can, or if we should, but we owe it to ourselves to at least try." Ryan looked at her, his gaze filled with a mix of surprise and something else, something more tender than she had ever seen in him. "I didn't expect you to say that." Emma offered a small, tentative smile. "Neither did I." Over the next few weeks, things between Emma and Ryan remained tentative but steady. They didn't rush into anything, didn't try to force a relationship, but instead, they focused on rebuilding something that had been damaged from the start: trust. They met for coffee, had long, honest conversations where Ryan opened up about his past, his childhood, and the reasons he had become the man he was. Emma listened, understanding more and more that Ryan had been shaped by a lifetime of abandonment and betrayal, by people who had only ever seen his wealth and power, never the man underneath. One evening, as they sat together in a small cafe downtown, Ryan told Emma the story of his father, a cold, ruthless man who had built the Caldwell Empire but never once showed affection or care for his son. Ryan had grown up believing that love was a weakness, that power was the only way to protect himself from being hurt. It explained so much of his behavior, the way he clung to control like a lifeline. "And you thought you could control me, too," Emma said softly, sipping her coffee as she watched him across the table. Ryan nodded, his eyes downcast. "I did. And I hate that I did." You were the first person who saw me as more than just the money, the power. I didn't know how to handle that. Emma reached out, placing her hand gently on top of his. You don't have to handle it, Ryan. You just have to let it happen. Ryan looked up at her, his gaze filled with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. I'm trying. And he was. Emma could see it in the way he interacted with her now, the way he gave her space, respected her boundaries, and, most importantly, listened to her. Ryan was still Ryan, still a man who thrived on control and power, but he was learning how to let go of that when it came to her. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments where Emma felt the weight of everything that had happened between them, the hurt that Ryan had caused her. But those moments were becoming fewer and farther between. And as they spent more time together, Emma found herself beginning to trust him again. One night, a few months after they had reconnected, Ryan invited Emma to dinner at his penthouse. It was the first time she had been back since that fateful confrontation, and as she stepped inside, memories flooded her mind. But this time, the space felt different. Warmer, more inviting. The tension that had once filled the air between them had been replaced by something softer, something more real. They shared a quiet, intimate meal, the conversation flowing easily between them. Ryan had cooked something that surprised Emma, and they laughed as he told her about the disastrous first attempt he had made in the kitchen. You're better off sticking to the boardroom, Emma teased, grinning as she took a bite of the roasted chicken he had prepared. Ryan chuckled, shaking his head. Yeah, I'll leave the cooking to you. After dinner, they sat together on the couch, watching the city lights twinkle through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was peaceful, comfortable, and for the first time in a long while, Emma felt completely at ease. As they talked about their futures, both of them cautiously optimistic but still unsure of what would come next, Ryan took Emma's hand in his. His touch was gentle, and when he spoke, his voice was soft, almost vulnerable. I never thought I'd say this, he began, but I'm glad we went through all of that. I'm glad we made it here. Emma looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. Me too, she whispered, surprised by how much she meant it. Ryan's thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand, and for a moment, they just sat there, the silence between them comfortable and full of unspoken understanding. Emma had never imagined that things would turn out like this, that she could find peace with someone like Ryan after everything that had happened. But as she leaned her head against his shoulder, she realized that maybe the journey they had been on, messy, painful, and unpredictable as it was, had brought them exactly where they were meant to be. It hadn't been easy. They had both made mistakes, both hurt each other in ways that would leave scars. But they had also grown, changed, and learned how to let each other in. Maybe that was what love really was, Emma thought, letting someone see all the broken, jagged pieces of yourself and trusting them enough to help you put them back together. As the night wore on and the city outside grew quiet, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The weeks that followed were a blur of new beginnings. Emma's restaurant continued to thrive, and with Ryan's support, this time offered without any ulterior motives, she was able to expand, opening a second location that quickly became just as successful as the first. Ryan, too, had changed. He was still the sharp, driven businessman who commanded respect in every room he entered, but he had learned how to let go of his need for control when it came to the people he cared about. He had learned how to be vulnerable, how to trust Emma, and in doing so, he had found a peace he hadn't known he was capable of. Their relationship was far from perfect. They still had arguments, still faced challenges. But the difference now was that they faced them together. There was no more manipulation, no more games. Just two people who had found their way to each other, despite all the odds. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony of Ryan's penthouse, looking out over the city that had brought them together, Emma turned to him and smiled. I never thought we'd get here, she said, her voice soft but filled with wonder. Ryan looked at her, his eyes full of affection. Neither did I. But I'm glad we did. Emma leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to his lips, and as she did, she realized that the journey they had been on, messy, complicated, and filled with twists and turns, had been worth it. Because in the end, they had found something real. And that was enough. Thank you so much for watching. If this story moved you, or if you have thoughts about how everything unfolded, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Your feedback means the world to me. And hey, if you don't want to miss what's coming next, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you'll be the first to know when a new story drops. Trust me, you won't want to miss the next chapter. It's going to be just as emotional and full of surprises. In the meantime, why not stick around and check out the next story that's waiting for you on screen? I think you're going to love it.